Turn to Romans 13, verse 3. We're going to make a brief retrograde motion because there was one phrase that I did not teach, 13:3, in the midst of all. The final phrase about the need for but for evil. Want to be not afraid of the authority? Do good, and you will have praise from it. Do good, and you will have praise from it. And so this is a very interesting, delicate, can be a minefield of sorts. In what ways should governments praise those who do good? So let's talk about what's good. What is good here? Is it those in a, I think he's using good in a civic sense, not in a spiritual. Civic good may come from someone who's spiritually motivated, but I think he's talking about civic good here, those who do good, and we'll talk about this a little more. In the Roman world, civic good had to do with courage and skill on the battlefield. And this was really the major emphasis. Sometimes they would have a pillar inscribed with the tail of their feet. They'd have a special entrance into the city of Rome, their very own private arch. They would be given lands. Rome was exorbitant toward their military heroes. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the biblical prescription for what nations should do for military heroes. This is certainly what Rome did. And because of the expansion of the Roman Empire, because of the need to maintain that against all kinds of foes, they rewarded very well this civic good of military courage and skill. In ancient Greece, there were rewards for athletic feats. If you just wore your crown of leaves, this little circlet of leaves around, you would have just the highest regard from everyone. Just a cheap little symbol of what you had done in some kind of athletic feat. But they would also give out wealth and land, abundantly even. In Greece also, they would set up a trophy. So here's how we get the word trophy. At the site of the victorious battle, they'd set up a trophy made of arms and armor of enemy soldiers who had routed from the battlefield. And trophy has its roots in the word rout. And so they would, when an enemy army, it started to break in that hand-to-hand combat, and guys started to sort out to the rear, well, the first thing they'd want to do is get rid of the heavy sword, the heavy chest piece, and so on. Get rid of anything that's going to encumber them so that they can outrun those who have armor on. Makes sense, right? It's like you don't want to be in a group of hikers, you don't want to be the slowest one in case you encounter a bear or a mountain lion. Okay, that's just the rule. So nobody wants to have their armor on. So when you scored a rout against the enemy, there were all these pieces of evidence of their rout, and they called those the trophy, the evidence that they'd won the battle. So they go collect them up, and they make them into this amalgam of a soldier. And they'd use a tree, and they'd hang all these chess pieces on a tree and make the outline of a soldier with spears and so on. And they'd put it all together. It was a pretty cool little thing. And a lot of times they'd inscribe on the on the chess piece, you know, here on such and such a date, we routed our enemy. And so this was a trophy. That's where we get trophy. And so the Greeks would do that. They'd set up a trophy for a group victory there. Also in Greece, it seems they were fond of public rewards. There were rewards for the best play at drama competition. And in the very beginning, the very first award was if you put on the best drama in Athens, you would get a goat. Now, this is something of value. They give you a goat. In Greek, goat is the word tragos, and it's where we get tragedy. Okay, so I don't know if it's tragic that you get a goat for putting on a play or what it is, but that's where you get the term tragedy. And so anyway, the tragedy is about going after the reward, I guess. However, what I found in my research was that rewards for political service are more difficult to sort out. And it's kind of interesting, military service, athletics, drama, but serving in political office was not something where you really found a lot of rewards. It was very frowned on. In Rome, political office was related to aristocracy for a long time. It was about the patrician class, that aristocratic class where you had a family name. It was also even higher than that. In the emperor's family, there were a few names that were above all, and there's kind of a divine right in a way that the emperorship goes down through a family and so on. And so you would gain the emperorship in that way, or you'd go and assassinate someone and that sort of thing. Political office was also awarded all the time for military service. And this is a way that you climb the political ranks. You would go out and serve in some hot war zone like Gaul, or up in Germania, or in what's now Great Britain. And you go up there in a war zone, and you might win various awards and crowns and so on. But one of the things they would do is give you a military office, a military office. In Greece, and this is a little further back from Bible times, political service was sometimes involuntary. You know how we do jury duty? You get that letter in the mail, and a lot of people, you know, they get that letter and they think, oh, why me? Why now? You know, it's considered largely an inconvenience. You know, how do I get off? How do I exhibit some bizarre behavior while I'm going through, you know, voir dire and all that. So anyway, but I disagree with that. I think it's a great privilege and a service. And there's a way that they select a jury, right? First, they pool a pool of names together, and then they put you through the process and you're selected. Well, in Greek democracy for a number of decades, that's the way they did it. That's the way they did it in Athens. And you could be just, you know, Joe the shopkeeper, and your name comes up, and next thing you know, you're a politician. And kind of interesting, I think. Political corruption in Greece was deeply frowned upon. And since political service was seen as a jury, like jury duty, political service was seen as a duty. Rewards for service were non-existent. You went and you served, and you were considered a great guy if you served with honor and endeavor and energy. You were just a great politician because you were called to it. It was your duty. So there's all these rewards, but I think it's interesting that Paul says, do good and you will have praise from it, praise from your government. So what is this praise? It's a word, epainon, E-P-A-I-N-O-N. And it's verbal praise. Well, let's make this clear. It's a verbal expression of praise. Somewhere down the road, it might result in compensation of other kinds. Like if you receive praise and you stick it on your resume, you may get a better job. If you have in the military, if you have a DD-14 and it tells all the places you served and what you did and the awards you received, and you give that as part of your resume, that may result in a good job and some other compensations and so on. But praise is verbal. So we're gonna walk through some places where it's used in ancient literature. And we're going to start with Herodotus and his histories. Here's a translation from A.D. Godley. All those on the mainland were now free men, but they came to be ruled by monarchs again, as I will now relate. There was among the Medes a clever man called Deioces. He was the son of Phraortes. Deioces was infatuated with sovereignty, and so he set about gaining it. So here's a guy who's kind of power mad, right? And he wants to wield political power over people. Already a notable man in his own town, one of the many towns into which Media was divided, he began to profess and practice justice more constantly and zealously than ever. And he did this even though there was much lawlessness throughout the land of Media. And though he knew that injustice is always the enemy of justice, then the Medes of the same town, seeing his behavior, chose him to be their judge. And for he coveted sovereign power, was honest and just. Now let's just pause for a moment and reflect. He wanted to wield political power, and so he figured the best way was to be honest and just. You know, it's almost like, why isn't that in the Bible? You know. But I thought it was great. And it says, Herodotus goes on to relate, by acting so, he won no small praise from his fellow townsmen. So this is, you have a certain reputation in the eyes of your fellow citizens, and also a form of praise from those who rule. It can be verbalized, it can be written, but it is praise from those who rule. That when the men of the other towns learned that Deioces alone gave fair judgments, having before suffered from unjust decisions, they came often and gladly to plead before him, and at last they would submit to no arbitration but his. How do you like that? In Sophocles' play Antigone, I highly recommend reading all these, by the way. Translation by Sir Richard Jebb. For whoever shows his excellence in the case of his own household will be found righteous in his city as well. But if anyone oversteps and does violence to the laws, or thinks to dictate to those in power, such a one will never win praise from me. So it's talking about just someone who's a good head of his household and how he deserves civic praise. Now, I'm not suggesting this is a biblical prescription, but it is an example of how praise is about what you do, who you are, and your public reputation. Your public reputation is so important. Paul talks about this when he writes to Timothy. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, he talks about how one who wants to be an overseer has to have a good public reputation, a good reputation among his neighbors, good reputation among all those that he goes about with. So there is this thing. So anyways, in the Antigone, it goes on to say, whomever the city may appoint, that man must be obeyed in matters small and great, in matters just and unjust. And I will feel confident that such a man would be a fine ruler, no less than a good and willing subject, and that beneath a hail of spears, he would stand his ground where posted a loyal and brave comrade in the battle line. And so this is his praise. I've seen this guy and his family. I know what he's going to be like when the spears are coming at us. That's praise. That's praise. From Plato's Laches, and this is a section from Socrates, and it's translated by W.R.M. Lamb. And this is indeed splendid praise which you are now receiving from men whose word is of great weight, and for such conduct as wins their praise. So let me tell you that I rejoice to hear this and to know that you have such a good reputation, and you in return must count me as one of your warmest well-wishers. And, you know, thinking about this, praise is public. There's this proverb about leadership: reprove in private, praise in public. Reprove in private, praise in public. And so this is public praise about civic good that we're talking about here. Here's a question to ask. I'm thinking about public praise from a government. Here is the government evaluates your service in whatever realm that is, as a soldier, as a police officer, as a judge, as a politician. It evaluates your service, and it says, is this person worthy? Did they discharge their responsibilities in a virtuous manner? So I want to track back to the Bible now. And it's interesting that you run into this epainon a number of times in passages, and it's always verbal. Again, it's always verbal. We're not talking about financial reward. He is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that which is of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. And his praise is not from men, but from God. And so at some point we're asking in civic good, is this praiseworthy in a sense of absolute truth, absolute virtue? And it doesn't, I think it's good to ask the question, would God praise this service? You know, did this person do their job as a public servant as unto the Lord? And that's a good thing that we can ask. For the government itself is praiseworthy in a true and absolute sense of virtue. 1 Corinthians 4, that was Romans 2:29. 1 Corinthians 4:5, therefore do not go on passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light those things hidden in the darkness and disclose the motives of men's hearts, and then each man's praise will come to him from God. And again, it's a verbalization, you know, the well done, good and faithful servant. It's a verbalization of this praise from God. And that's the quality of praise that we're looking for, this verbal, you're someone of good reputation, you've acquitted yourself well. But I think especially the core verse is Philippians 4:8. And Philippians 4:8, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellent and anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. You see how he takes these virtues, and many of them are godly virtues, but they can be expressed in public service, and they're worthy of our praise too, not only the praise of God, but our praise also. Pray. A public recognition of worthwhile service. A public recognition of worthwhile service. So to confirm this principle, let's go to 1 Peter 2:13 and 14. because we have it not only in Romans 13:3, but over in 1 Peter chapter 2, 13 and 14, where Peter writes, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right." Again, here are government leaders, institutions, authorities who are praising those who do right. So this summary, here is a summary of this principle, I think. And I think we have to be very circumspect, we have to be very careful about what this means, because it is defining a role of government as a divine institution. It's defining a divinely ordained role of government. So as a government sees fit, it may communicate praise and recognition for virtuous service. As a government sees fit, it may communicate praise and recognition for virtuous service. It may award its soldiers, its citizen soldiers, for virtuous and meritorious service, both on the battlefield and otherwise. There are long periods of times, we hope, long periods of times between wars. But someone's got to keep the training and the quality going. And those who do well in preparation for war should receive recognition from the government. I think we have that. It may also award its servants on the domestic side appropriately. Police officers, judges, justices, everyone who serves in a government capacity, politicians can, right? I agree with the Greeks. Great care must be taken with rewarding a political class because of corruption. The award should not be in any kind of financial or material sense, but praise, verbalization, verbal recognition. You served well. You served virtuously and honestly, and with justice and righteousness. Those are good. Those are good words of praise. The government should do it, and a government that does that creates a culture. It creates a culture. Creates a culture of excellence. When you find out in raising children, if you praise them for the good that they're doing, it means a lot, and it motivates them to do those things. It's wonderful. Do those things. Stay on the positive side. So there's this big question mark out there. It has to do with government and the element of culture and the arts. And we Americans funnel a gigantic pile of money into culture, the arts, parks, recreation, national parks, those kinds of things. And, just a ton of money related to our national heritage, our great outdoors, and so on. And what's the proper role of government in that area? I'm not sure I have an immediate answer to that, but I think I would stay on the side of praise, not money. I think that's where I'd stay. And I think that probably makes good sense within the context of what we're seeing here. So the government may reward someone for excellence in the arts. I think that's fine. To give out a certificate. As far as all the other money that gets channeled in there, I don't know. I mean, we buy stadiums, we do all convention centers, tons of stuff. It's an interesting thought. I sure love libraries. I love art galleries. They're publicly funded. They wouldn't be there unless they had that. I think, I don't know, but praise seems to be the limit on these things. National parks, you know, what do you want me to do with that? I don't have the answer for that. I love the national parks. I use them. And so I don't know where the absolute limit is. And I just have to be honest about that. I think that the praise part is a great principle, though. Government should recognize excellence in its citizens, especially as they contribute to the nation. They contribute to the nation. Okay. Now we're going to, I'm going to read to you verse 4, Romans 13:4. It's for it is a servant of God to you for the good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword at random, for he is a servant of God, an avenger to wrath for those who do evil. And so we have examined this. And verse 5, it is a necessity to be subject, not only because of the wrath, but also because of the conscience. And there are two sides of the motivation to obey the law. And the first side is wrath. Just be afraid, because, you know, you could get caught and thrown in jail. I recently was reading about the Unabomber. I saw just some factoid somewhere that he was a professor at UC Berkeley. And of course, you know, we're a Berkeley family. So anyway, yeah, shake your head. He was a professor at UC Berkeley in mathematics from 67 to 69 before he went to his cabin in Montana and went nuts. He was nuts before that. But anyway, you know, they caught this guy. And he was way up in a cabin in Montana. Eventually, they tracked him down, and he deserved to be caught and executed for his crimes. And I read, and I couldn't believe what I read. That he's a Colorado resident. I don't know if you knew that. He lives down in Florence at Supermax. Okay, and so he's down at the Supermax federal prison in Florida, and he used to have coffee, his little coffee clatch, with the guy who bombed the World Trade Center in 1993, and also Timothy McVeigh until McVeigh was gone. And so those three would have their little morning coffee together down at Supermax. And you know, if there's ever any argument for the government bearing the sword, I think that's a pretty good one. Just evil people. And the government bearing the sword of punishment, and it is very expressly a sword. It's a life-taking implement. It doesn't say the government bears the prison cell. Okay, usually prison cells were just you held someone there. You didn't imprison someone. You held them there for trial, and then they were either acquitted or whatever. And so, you know, we have our whole rehabilitation subject for another time. But here it does say the sword. And the sword can be a motive for those who are inclined. Anymore, we have sleazy lawyers and you know, and we should have rights about to a fair trial, but we have sleazy lawyers and the rest. But it does say the sword. And people should be afraid of breaking the law. Like and we don't have this direct chain of events. If I do this, I will receive this punishment. We don't have that. If I do this now, I might get away with it. If I do this, I might get out in 14 years on good behavior. Okay, that's not the sword. The sword is an implement for killing. And they don't mean wounding, okay? It's killing. And so this is the argument that certain people are going to be motivated to avoid criminal activity because they know for sure what they will receive if apprehended and convicted, okay? But we're in all kinds of trouble because, we don't have moral absolutes anymore. And so we're in tremendous trouble. But the other side's the conscience, and this is the higher motivation of the Christian. This should be our motivation. And here we're doing something because it is right, and it's from our love for God, and not because we're afraid. A Christian should never be afraid of the sword. Why would we be ever afraid? We love the Lord. We're good citizens. We're responsible. We do public good too. In the hierarchy of motivation, conscience is superior. It's why you should do things, not because you're afraid, but because you love the Lord and His righteousness. In the hierarchy of motivation, that should be it. That's why it's best to have a strong conscience and let it rule you. Let your conscience govern you. If your conscience governs you, why would you fear anything? If you have a good conscience from the Lord, why would you fear anything? Build up a strong conscience in the Word. That's the key. If we love God, we're going to love His institutions of higher authority and why they exist. Why they exist. We should love the sword and also the praise that we reap from these authorities. So verse 6 says, "For this reason also you pay taxes, for they are servants of God devoted to the very same thing." I had a nice discussion with Turner about this verse. It's an interesting verse. Let me give it to you as it kind of rolls out in the Greek. It starts out with, "For this reason," I'm explaining what I've been talking about with the function of government. And I'm relating it to taxes. Because we not only obey the laws of a nation, but also pay the taxes which support the same. And Paul notes, I think he notes here, the current habit and the norm of citizens. He says, "For this reason also you pay taxes." By form, the word could be either a command or just a reflection of what's going on. Like if I looked at you and I said, "Pay your taxes," that implies that someone in here isn't doing that. Okay? But if I say, "For this reason we pay taxes," I'm kind of assuming this audience here are all tax-paying citizens, okay? And I think that's a little more natural for what Paul's doing here. But he says, "For this reason also you pay taxes." And then he says, "For they are servants of God." Here's the question. What or who is the they? Are the taxes a servant of God? Are the rulers a servant of God? Which is it? There's no built-in or there's no written pronoun. It's just built into the verb here. They are. In Greek, a verb can contain its own pronoun. So it's just they are. And then it says servants. And he uses this word that's often used of religious service, like the service of the priesthood and so on. But the servants, it's a masculine plural, and the nearest masculine plural is all the way back up in verse 3 when it talks about the rulers. Unless you have a masculine plural, taxes, which is right next to that. the taxes are a servant to God. So you kind of have this debate. And let me tell you about this debate. So do you go back and say that he's personifying the taxes that you pay into little servant guys? Like you send a check in, and that check grows feet and walks down to the tax office, and that money grows feet and it does all the things that it does. He's personifying the taxes. Or is he jumping all the way back to verse 3? It'd be really weird grammatically if he did that. Rules of grammar are what they are. You should know that we like to obey the rules of grammar when we interpret Scripture. Okay? And this seems kind of funny, but writers of Scripture break their own rules for rhetorical purposes all the time. They'll just do it, just like we say ain't if we're affecting some kind of an accent, I ain't going to do that anymore. For making ourselves out to be some dumb hick, that's what we do. And that's poor grammar, ain't is a rotten word. So, we do that. And if you want to do that for emphasis, I can tell you it happens all the time. They drop out verbs. They do this, they do that. It happens all the time. They break the rules of grammar. In Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, in his introduction, you read, it's the most discouraging paragraph in all of classical Greek, because he says, this war was so messed up, I'm going to break all the rules of grammar in writing about it. And you're like, so now not only do I have to read classical Greek, which is an incredibly difficult language, Thucydides just told me he's going to break all the rules of grammar. So look out for that. Well, I think he did that as an affectation, and it's not as bad as that. But I'm telling you, you can break the rules. So probably wondering where you're going with all this. Either the taxes are servants of God, or the rulers are servants of God. Now, let's go to the next phrase. They are servants of God. Taxes are rulers, devoted to the very same thing. So he uses this word devoted, which just all by itself means to kind of go up and hug someone, okay, to like be very close to someone. And then when you add on a preposition to the front, it's one of those hugs where you don't let go. Where you're just so, you're saying goodbye for a long time, and you don't want the hug to end. It's that kind of, and what it's saying is you're practically the same thing. It's to cling to be so devoted that is practically the very same thing. And so the very same thing, taxes and rulers are devoted to this very same function, the divine institute of God. As we saw in 1 Timothy 2, 1-4, and other passages, these rulers, according to the divine mandate, are here so that we can lead quiet and peaceful lives. That's what they're here for. They serve a noble function in God's eyes so that we can worship, praise, study, live out our lives in whatever way that we see fit. And this is a marvelous function of government. And so I would say, I really thought about this, went back and forth a little bit. I would say that you should think of your taxes as servants of God. I think that is, you have to go back too far to pick up that other possible subject. Rulers are servants of God too. Now, taxes and rulers, taxes support the rulers, And they're devoted to the very same thing. And that thing that they're devoted to is a divine institution, something that God said, this is what humanity needs as they spread across the earth and form into nations and boundaries and so on. And so they are devoted to that very same thing. And Paul wants them to realize, because we tend to think of our taxes as, a burden. And I get it because there's so much corruption and waste in our government. But I don't think that you should think that. There was plenty of corruption and waste in ancient Rome. The excess you've only read about, maybe you've seen a few movies along that line as well. I don't recommend any of the movies. The excess is too excessive, all right? But don't focus on that. What I'm giving is a support for divine service, even in government function. So final command is to render what is due. Therefore, render to all what is owed, the obligations, literally. To whom tax, the tax. To whom toll, the toll. To whom fear, the fear. To whom honor, the honor. Paul finishes his section on human government with 4 exhortations, all governed by render to all the obligations. Now, render, apodidomi, boy, what a great word. It means to give back what is properly owed, even to return something to its owner. So now I want you to think, first of all, about taxes, because Jesus decisively taught about taxes. We find it in Matthew 22, among the other synoptic gospels. Matthew 22, 18 to 20, or 22, 18 to 22. Jesus perceived their malice and said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax." And they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And hearing this, they were amazed, and leaving him, they went away. Whose money is it? So it's my money. It's in my possession. Well, you're using an implement. Money is an implement, okay? And you're using this. And the silver and the minting is done by the government. So when it says give back to, it says give back to the government what belongs to them in taxation. He's saying it's proper. It's what you owe the government. They're doing something. You owe them. It's theirs, and you owe it to them. Likewise, the government, think about roads. I thought about a few things. So who owns the road? Government does. They build the road with taxpayer monies. Public roads, all other kinds of thoroughfares. Think of railroads, riverine transportation, perhaps, other things. So how do you collect funds? Well, one of the ways is by a toll. Okay, get the toll, and I realize, look, I get it too. It's corrupt. It's gross. There's so much graft. There's so much wastage. I get it. But Paul says, pay the tolls. If you're going to use the road, pay it. Now, I like how it's toll, because toll is based on usage. You know, if you use the road, you pay for it. So that, that's an interesting thought there. This is my platform for reforming the United States of America. Roads will only be paid for by tolls. But we pay tolls, taxes, licenses, you name it. The government owns the sword. And the government has a responsibility to guard against enemies, foreign and domestic. They must recruit soldiers and supporting forces, police officers, judges, a multitude of other roles. Again, in the military and domestic service, all kinds of things need to happen. They need to pay tax collectors. They need to pay the guys in the toll booths. They must recruit all of these. They must supply weapons, food, housing, training, multitude of other materials to efficiently fulfill their mission. And citizens may support even by participation in these things. That's public service. When it says to the sword, he says, to whom fear the fear. And I think that fear is that the government bearing the sword. And you owe it to that role of government in bearing the sword. And if the government says, we need you to join our army, and you are hereby commanded, you owe that to them. You owe that to them. I'm a big fan of all volunteer armed forces. I really am. I can also perceive a time when it's necessary to conscript. But the government owns the sword. A government is owed a debt of honor for the service it renders. It possesses an honorable and divinely instituted service to its citizens. It's proper to honor the flag as a symbol of the Constitution, the land, the citizens, and the government of a country. It's a symbol, but it's proper to honor the flag. Proper to honor the flag. It's my personal opinion, but if you have a dispute with your government or the way things are going with national or local policy, choose something else than the symbol of our Constitution and our people. That's not an appropriate thing, because that stands for liberty and justice for all. It stands for that. It stands for that. You may dispute that all are receiving liberty and justice. And I think in a great many cases, this is true. Fine. Don't dispute the symbol of those principles. Don't protest against that. Rather, honor the flag, honor the government and its symbols. You owe a debt of honor to your country and to those who have served. And so it's proper to owe a debt of honor and verbal praise to those who serve and to the country itself. So Paul writes, let every soul be subject to superior authorities. For there is no authority except by God, and the existing authorities have been established by God, so that the one who opposes the authority resists the command of God, and those who resist will receive judgment on themselves. For those ruling are not afeared for good works, but for evil. And do you want to be not afraid of the authority? Do good, and you will have praise from it. For it is a servant of God to you for the good. But if you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword at random, for he is a servant of God, an avenger to wrath to those who do evil. Therefore, it is a necessity to be subject, not only because of the wrath, but also because of the conscience. For this reason, you also pay taxes, for they are servants of God, devoted to the very same thing. Therefore, render to all the obligations, to whom tax, the tax, to whom toll, the toll, to whom fear, the fear, to whom honor, the honor. And so we have come halfway through Romans chapter 13. I have two more sections related to Romans 13, 1 to 7. We're talking about options, what to do when authority goes wrong, okay? Because authority does often, because of the sin nature, wield itself in evil ways. And so we've talked about appeal, personal civil disobedience, and so on. Well, one thing we have to do is examine removal of self from under authority, and that is an important option that is often seen in the Bible. And then we need to talk about armed rebellion, and that's a far more difficult one that we're going to receive warnings about more than anything. So in any event, let's close in a word of prayer and take a break. Lord, thank you for all that you do for us, but especially for the divine institutions meant to protect us and cultivate our freedom. We thank you for our national and local authority here in the United States and Colorado. We thank you for them. Help us to be good citizens and help us to stand for what is right. In Christ's name, amen.